Hello and welcome back to the Planning Perspectives podcast. I'm one of your two hosts today, Jamie Hopkins, joined by my co-host, Kate Duffy. Kate, great to see you.
Thank you, Jamie. Always good to be here.
Yeah, it is always good to be here. And today we're going to dive into one of my favorite topics. And it's one that often for people, they kind of put in the wrong, bucket in their head. And they think this topic's really only for the ultra high net worth, individuals and families out there, or if something actually already went wrong. And this topic is estate planning. And it's near and dear to me. We'll get into it because, my dad passed away when I was 8 years old. And I saw all the lack of quality estate planning around that because I had two parents that were non-college graduates working in the construction world. And that's not where estate planning typically made its way, but it needs to be there for everyone. So we're going to hop into this super important topic today. And I'm excited to talk about it.
Same here. And I will also mention that typically is what people think of is their things and death. But estate planning actually is much broader than that. It's about the decisions that you leave behind for your family members, but also what happens during your life and how you protect it.
Yeah, and to guide us through this conversation today, we've got Garrett Spangler, our Senior Vice President and Senior Wealth Strategist here at Bryn Mawr Trust Advisors. And Garrett really works closely with families, business owners, that whole gamut to help get the estate planning documents, plan, process in place so people have that clarity of what they want, how the families are going to be left after something happens, managing the tax situation too. But most of it's about carrying through those wishes for the family members.
And when we were talking to Garrett earlier, I loved what you said. You had a very inviting line because these conversations can be really challenging. But you talk with clients about if you can dream it, I can draft it.
Yeah, that was a something that I just kind of came up with because I think that's the reality of the situation. So, appreciate you having me on today. Very nice to be here. And yeah, planning really does, focus not only on what happens when I die, but what about all the things that could be happening during my life? And, when I am gone, what else is there that might need to be addressed beyond just my stuff? So that's where I like to start. If you can dream it, I can draft it. That's often a question that people have about where to begin. And so I think that's a really good question and a way to get people to really start to think and talk about, their own plans and what they'd like to have happen.
I think that's a really great point too, because even as an advisor, sometimes when I'm talking with clients, the question was for a very long time, what happens if something happens tomorrow to you? And it is narrowly focusing this particular topic in one area. But we have to consider what happens when you might become disabled or you're not able to make decisions anymore, because that is wrapped into this conversation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everyone does think about estate planning as, what happens when I pass away? After death decisions, who's going to be in charge of things, who's going to receive whatever it is I may have accumulated over the course of my life. But it's really a lot more than that. And, sometimes in insurance, people talk about, oh, life insurance being important for, what happens at my demise. But the reality is that disability insurance is extremely important because people are more likely to have a disability during their lifetime. And the same thing is true of estate planning. Many people will have an accident or, people are living longer and longer these days. And so it's not just about when they die, but as they get to more advanced ages, people are having, increasing numbers of Alzheimer's, dementia, things along those lines. And we need to think about who are the people that can help me if I find myself in a situation like that. So it really is a lot more than just what happens at my demise. It really talking about what happens during my lifetime and who can I empower in my life to help me make the decisions that need to be made.
Yeah, you've said this before, but estate planning is really about how you live your life. And I think that's a great framework for this, but unpack that a little bit more. So what does that really mean? What are the building blocks of a well-designed plan that actually helps you live that life? Because I always say it to people too, like estate plan's not really about the money and everything that's in the estate. It's about how you're living your life, the concerns you have, taking care of people, giving your loved ones the best life possible.
Yeah, it's really about planning for your lifetime. not just about what happens after you would die, but all the decisions that need to be made, all the things that could come up during your lifetime. That's really what you need to think about, those what ifs, and who in your family might be able to help, or other friends. Sometimes it's not just a family member. We don't like to be a burden on our kids or our family. So making some of these decisions in advance and trying to come up with a plan as to what happens when those situations do arise, that's really, probably the most important
Mhm.
aspect to estate planning, not just about the stuff.
I like how you talk about empowering people. So I had this situation a handful of years ago. My parents were in their 70s and 80s. And for the longest time, my dad would handwrite a note when my parents traveled, everything equally to our children.
Mhm.
And of course, as you get older, you know that this is going to be, it could be a burden. So a handful of years ago, I literally went to their house and I said, I just want to sit down and talk for 2 minutes. And what I had done was I printed out all of the responsibilities of an executor
Mm.
of an estate.
Mhm.
And I just read bullet for bullet 4 pages because they said, oh, don't worry about it. If something happens to dad, mom will take care of it and vice versa. And when I got to the end of it, they were just staring at one another
Wow.
like, absolutely not, because sometimes you just don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And it opened the door for saying, like, when you are in a difficult situation, let us help you. Let us help take the decision making or do it in collaboration with you now before we are at that point of crisis, potentially.
Yeah, well, that's hard, right? To have these
It is.
conversations with family can always be a challenge. And, especially when you talk about like parents and children, there's a family dynamic there, at least generally, where, you know, parents are in charge, children
Right.
listen some of the time,
Right.
most of the time. I mean,
Yeah.
hopeful, but when you have that kind of family dynamic, you need to think about those things, start those conversations. Lots of times parents don't share some of those details with their kids. And it
Right.
really is about, not only the individual, but there's generational planning involved. You want to include your
Right.
kids in those conversations. You want them to know what your wishes are. And, lots of times people don't know. That actually just reminds me of something that I often would talk about with people in making some of these decisions, especially end of life decisions. It's not just about you making end of life decisions for yourself. It's so your family really knows what you would want, because no
Hmm.
matter what decision your family might make, they're going to be kept up at night by the question of, did they make the decision that they thought that you would have wanted.
Mhm.
Doesn't matter what it was. It's If, at
Right.
least if you write something down, it gives you some level of comfort to be able to say, okay, this is what mom or dad wanted, no matter what the situation was that actually got them to that particular place.
And sometimes that can happen outside of the estate plan. You've talked about a family memo. So give us a
Mhm.
little bit of detail on that, because that can really pass down like values or certain things that you want to unfold
Mhm.
at whether you are disabled or you do pass away.
Absolutely. I mean, the estate plan itself, and I'll touch on some of the important documents. I think that's worth, covering
Mhm.
again. But um, the family memo, I think, is underrated. It's a place where people can outline some of their wishes, some specifics, where to find things, hey, you can find the keys to the safe in this spot, or, there's some gold bars hidden in the backyard, whatever it may be. Just outlining some of those details to let people know where they can find important papers, records about things, how to access certain things, where maybe passwords are kept. There's all sorts of different things that can go in there. Maybe it's just, no matter what happens, don't let Uncle Jimmy talk at my funeral. Like, there are things that people just want to have happen,
Right.
and just letting your family know about some of those wishes that you have. It's not an official document, but it's something that
Mhm.
typically your executor, your family, they're going to honor. They understand that those are either important topics, or at least will be really helpful to point them in the direction of how to locate what there was that was left behind.
Right.
Yeah, there was actually a version of that at some point. You probably remember it going through school too, but there's like called the Five Wishes document. Do you remember that?
I do.
Yeah. And it was a variation of that. And they were trying to put like some structure around this family memo with like your values, but all these different pieces. And there was a little bit of a push for a while to be able to make it a legal document. It never really caught on at the
Mhm.
state legislative level, but Yeah, well, we were going back, law school and taxes. There was a little bit of a push for a time around that. There's two other ones that I love in that space too. There's legacy letters, which are a little bit different. They're like really you write them like to your kids
Mhm,
about all the
mhm.
things you cherish about them. One of my friends, this is all he does for a living now, and he's got a wild story. But he was in family vacation in Hawaii, and his dad drowned in front of him, like as he was
Wow.
trying to help save him, and he just happened to go back to the hotel that night, and his dad had written a legacy letter that was in his stuff. He wasn't
Mm,
even planning on giving it to him yet, right? He had just had it there, and he literally read it like a couple hours after his dad died, and he quit his career at that point and
Mm.
shifted, and this is what he does for a living now. But those are powerful kind of like letters to your children, your spouse, things like that. The other one that I like a lot is and we used to do this in a coaching program I was part of, but write your own obituary.
Mhm.
mm,
It's
mhm.
really not meant to be used as your obituary, but it's more about going back to your point, Garrett, about the life that you're living.
Yeah.
And are you living a life where you'd be proud of the obituary that you would write today? Or is there a lot of stuff that, you'd look and say, you know what, I'm not really living how I want my story to end up? And that's for any age. Are you living the life that you'd be proud of when you're no longer on this world? And I think those are very powerful, like not pure estate planning documents,
Yeah. Yeah.
but variations of what you said with the family memo.
Yeah, that's very important to think about some of those things because a lot of times, the family doesn't know. Maybe, for example, lots of times you may have a friend that was, maybe from law school or from, some part of your life, a previous job you worked, whatever the case may be, just an old friend that the family doesn't really know. You maybe just talk to them on the phone occasionally. You kept in touch for decades. Maybe only saw them very occasionally, but the family doesn't know about that. Putting some notes like that about to know,
Mhm.
hey, contact my friend if something happens to me because I know that they would want to be at my funeral or my celebration of life party or whatever it is that you have. Putting some of those notes somewhere is a great idea, and they usually don't end up in
Yeah.
these, structured, very important,
Right.
typical estate planning documents.
I think there's a good point here. Like you talk about the obituary and the control that we have over living our lives and what we want to dictate for ourselves. But then we let go of that control when we don't institute these plans.
Mhm.
It's like at that point, you're like, okay, well, someone will take care of it. Something will happen.
You think that?
Right.
Yeah. Or people assume it's just, one way or another, this is going to get taken care of and I don't have to worry about it too much. I mean, sometimes people are concerned about, thinking about, oh, I don't want to, be concerned or talk about my own demise.
Right.
Like that can be
That's
scary for
hard.
people. Having these conversations, like we touched on earlier, about,
Hmm.
bringing in younger family members, extended family, whoever it may be that might be involved, to have these more difficult conversations. That's always been a challenge. I mean, it's the little things often that mean the most too. You don't think about it, but I can tell you the first time I ended up in court was over a locket. I mean, the family just could not decide. It wasn't about big money or, a house or like things that you think about. Oh, these major, assets or things that I've, saved or accumulated over the course of a lifetime. No, it was really more about some sentimental value and who got to keep some of those things. So, those are
Yeah.
the types of things that can be nice to outline, maybe in a family memo. Sometimes people call it in a will memo that would be referenced by maybe your will or other estate planning documents and things. But keeping all of those
Yeah.
things, a part of the conversations and then being written down somewhere just to let people know this is what I wanted really goes a long way to make it a lot easier if something does happen.
And it's not just a one and done conversation. So they are difficult conversations, but if you open the door and you start to have them, the more you come back to the table, the easier it gets to share because there is this taboo around money and talking about this, which can be a challenge when it does come to
Mhm.
multi-generational wealth transfer or just talking with your parents about estate planning or your kids. So it's like opening up the door, coming back to the table, revisiting the conversation, which makes it easier over time. Again, we talked about this before. Like the best piece of advice that I have ever gotten is you can plan in advance or you can plan in crisis.
Yeah.
And it's like we want to help our clients and ourselves plan in advance for these things.
Absolutely. I mean, so often I used to see people come in when they would lose a loved one,
Mhm.
typically a parent, these are, grown children, probably in their like 60s themselves, probably something along those lines. But they would come in, had to deal with, opening probate, going through the estate administration process. They faced challenges. They didn't know where things were. There wasn't a clear roadmap and a guide for how to do whatever, how to locate certain things. They just weren't sure, and they were figuring it out. And almost without a doubt, I always had people come and say, "Okay, I just dealt with all these issues with my parents. I need to make a plan that will avoid that and make it easier for my children when the time comes." And that's really what it's all about. Thinking about that intergenerational aspect and putting together a plan that is for today. You want to think about, okay, if something happens to me tomorrow, what do I want to have happen? Um, but you're going to update it over the course of
Mhm.
your life. There's going to be changes in your life. People are getting married, having kids, getting divorced, people get sick. There's all sorts of different things that come up. And when those sorts of things happen, that's when, hey, maybe it's time to, make some updates to our plan, but get a baseline plan in
Mhm.
place and then address those changes as they come up.
We really do live in a death denying society. We don't like to talk about it. And then when you wrap money into it, we want to talk about even less. And people do want to plan for a good life and a life well lived. And so we
Mhm.
always talk about retirement planning, and people plan out the phases of the go go, the slow go, the no go. And
Mhm.
then I've always added this saying, right? There's the final act, which is after that. And
Mhm.
we do need a plan for that. But people kind of stop up till that point because a lot of the gratification you get personally is not, you're not going to see it at that point. But that's when, right, finality becomes reality, and you do have to have something in place there. Now, Garrett, everybody has a plan today.
Mhm.
They're just not all good plans.
That's true.
Mhm.
That's true.
We're going to rely on the state government to tell you how to distribute these assets. And
Mhm.
I think if most people's trust in the government is at like an all-time low right now, so we
Yeah.
probably don't want to lean into, hey, is our government going to distribute this to our heirs and loved ones in an efficient fashion? So what are these like default, or I kind of have a plan, which you've probably heard that almost every time you meet someone. Oh, well, I kind of have a plan. They're like, well, are there any documents? Well, we haven't gotten around to them yet. That's a pretty
Yeah.
normal story. But where does that break down
Yeah,
when you
I
look at
mean,
it?
technically anything can be a will. You can have a holographic will that you scribble some notes on a cocktail napkin, or Kate, as you said,
Mhm.
made a few notes before, going out on a family trip or whatever it may be. That technically could kind of work, but it's leaving out so much and leaving so much to chance. People often do talk about, well, I have a plan, or maybe they just created a plan online. I mean, there's so many tools these days. You can, go online to, there's obviously websites you can get them done. I mean, AI tools are big now. People are starting to do some of their own planning. But really, I think sitting down and having a conversation with someone who really does estate planning professionally is the best way to go, because they'll start to ask the right questions,
Mhm.
help you to figure out what actually needs to go into it. You don't have to worry about the technical aspects so much, leave that to the experts, so to speak. But, actually meeting with someone and talking through what are, all the questions that need to be answered. And they'll probably prompt, I mean, anytime I would sit down with someone to talk about estate planning, I would let them know right up front, I'm gonna ask you a bunch of questions. You're gonna know the answers to most of them, but I'm gonna leave you with a few that I know you're gonna want to give some more thought to, discuss with the family, and finally make some well thought out decisions about what will happen in the future. So I really think that's the way to
Mhm.
go. And everyone says, oh, I just need a simple will. I don't have much. It's not about that. There's family dynamics. Everyone has different situations with their family, and it's more about figuring out how to navigate that in a way that everyone feels included. Equal isn't always fair.
Right.
Yeah.
You can handle things differently. And, having someone who has been through the process before, I think really is invaluable in, guiding those sorts of conversations.
Yeah. I do wanna hone in. You had touched on this before, that life evolves. People get married, they get divorced, they have kids, but you've got business owners, you've got blended families. Like, I'm sure, all have stories where we could say someone had an estate plan, they passed away, they hadn't reviewed it, and exes have ended up with a multitude of assets that was not intentional. And so you put the baseline in place, but you have to be really cognizant about these life changes and going back to revisit it and to change it so that it
Yeah.
protects what you've built.
It really is important. Getting a plan in place and then revisiting it is, a key aspect. I would always leave people with the note or something to keep in mind that if something significant changes, you
Mhm.
have a grandchild, you have something that impacts you, then it might be time to revisit that plan and make sure that, it's up to date, that it still
Mhm.
follows your wishes. There's always changes that are going on. And it doesn't mean you always need to make changes to your estate plan. Building in flexibility is a key. I always encourage that because the one thing that we know is going to be consistent is that there's going to be change. Something's going to
Right.
happen. And so, trying to build around that, consider that while still planning for today is, I think the best way to approach a plan.
Mhm.
There, you brought up, Kate, the X conversation with this. One of the big ones that's a surprise to people is that their 401k and retirement plans, which we just did an episode on with Jackie Reeves. But if you leave your ex spouse as the beneficiary of your 401k plan, they are entitled to it, regardless of which state in this country you live in, because that is a federal law that supersedes state law, your will, any of those things. Now, there are some states where IRAs, though, it kind of follows similar rules, but if the ex spouse was left on it, you didn't change it, there would be a breach of contract if your divorce decree actually covered
Mhm.
it. But at the federal level, there's not. So if you leave them on that 401k, they're entitled to it, regardless of even if you already paid out some of it during the divorce, they are still entitled to it. Same thing for federal life insurance. It's not super common, but if you're a federal employee,
Mhm.
that also kicks in there. So those are ones that people think I've already dealt with this,
Mhm.
but yet
Mhm.
those wrinkles still show up with some assets due to the way that
Right.
the laws work from federal and state rules. So it's very interesting. So, Garrett, so what's one thing that you would say if somebody hasn't started any planning today? What would you suggest them to get started? What's the simplest first step?
Yeah, I mean, it's really about having the conversation. You want to talk to your spouse, you want to talk to your kids, and then reach out to an advisor of some sort. You can do your own research online. I still encourage, I really think there's a lot of value. I actually really love the approach that we take here at Bryn
Mhm.
Mawr. We get in front of people, we have professionals like myself that are available to all of our clients to have conversations that are not on the clock, like you might be if you go directly to an attorney's office. I mean, they're inevitable. You're going to still need to hire an attorney to actually do the drafting of the documents. But if there's, an advisor in your life, even if it's just a financial advisor or an advisor of another type that has some idea as to what is going on in your life, what your finances look like, they can help you to figure out, okay, what do you need to do? Start to have that conversation and discuss the things that need to be, discussed to go into that plan. So, uh, yeah, starting the conversation is really where it begins. And then you go from there to figure out, the documents that you might need to draft.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's about those two things. It's the conversation alongside the documents
Hmm.
and us helping make that conversation a little bit easier for our clients with their families.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Um, there's a few documents I think that are important that everyone should have. Um, you know, as you go up and get more sophisticated and there's additional complexities, maybe you have some more advanced trusts and things like that. But everyone really just needs to at least have like a will, some powers of attorney for financial purposes, as well as making healthcare decisions, um, and then a living will. And again, I think I did mention that very briefly earlier, but you just want to let your loved ones know when the time comes and, there is no hope of recovery, everything's been done by the doctors that they possibly can do, then what do you want to do? And do you want to be kept alive artificially? Do you,
Mhm.
you want to just be given some pain meds and allowed to pass on? Um, Spelling that out and just putting together those basic documents, I think is, the great place to start. Those powers of attorney are very powerful during your lifetime. And then the will take care of, what you want to have happen after you pass. So getting those in place is, really the most important step. And then you can improve from there or make changes from there as time goes on.
Yeah, and I think a big value of all this, the conversations, the involving the family, getting plans in place, going through kind of a conversation with the professional is a bit of the organization. Because as you start to live your life, you just start accumulating things.
Hmm.
We see the clients with 100 different checking accounts at every institution, chasing different interests and different savings accounts and digital assets at, hundreds and hundreds of websites now,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
just totally disorganized on that. And while you live your life, you can barely keep it together. Nobody remembers their passwords anymore, which is probably in part a good thing. But this whole growth of digital assets and just the spread of things, before, people would have a house, and if they had any assets, they like buried it outside in, the
Right.
yard somewhere. And we still,
Mhm.
find people with metal detectors finding, things of gold buried in people's backyards. But
Yeah.
the world got a lot more complex. And so that organizational challenge around the estate process is, if you don't do it while you're alive, you are leaving that to your loved ones or your spouse at probably the worst time in their life to then go reorganize your life. And I just think that if you really care about your loved ones, that's, really doing a disservice to them on something you could put together today.
Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely true. It's always a challenge to think about some of those things outside of, I just talked about some of the basic estate documents. They don't cover anything related to your digital life. Everybody has a
Mhm.
digital life these days, and, tons of passwords, different accounts, different places. And, talk about security. I actually had a client who was an IT guy, still a pretty young guy when he unexpectedly passed away.
Mm.
He was a photographer, and being into
Mm,
IT, he had thousands of family photos,
yeah.
beautiful photos saved in secure, like hard drives and backup
Yeah,
systems
can't
and
get it
whatnot on a
any.
home network. And he was doing sort of the right thing in keeping those passwords private and secure and whatnot.
Yeah.
No one was able to get into
Wow.
these photos, and the family lost all these photos and, important things. And, as much as he was doing the right thing, he really needed to leave a little bit more detail, make sure that, his wife at least had some idea how to access this if she really needed to. And so sometimes it's little things like that that, aren't in the hard and fast, tried and true, set of documents you might prepare, but people need to think about whether that's in, again, a family memo or just some notes somewhere. Have those conversations. Make sure your family knows where to find certain things, because there's a lot of stuff that has sentimental value that you're going to want them to be able to have access to or find or locate, that otherwise they may never even know about.
And you don't have to do it alone.
You
Like
don't.
there are professionals and partners out there that can
Hmm.
help guide these conversations. So
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, Garrett, thanks for everything you do, working with all the families out there, getting their estate plans in order, and letting people live their life to the fullest. And I hope everybody enjoyed this conversation today. Hopefully, it made the conversation right top of mind, a little bit clearer, a little bit more simpler, some steps to take. If you want to reach out to us, we're happy to talk to you about it. I think we have a research project from about 2 years ago on digital assets. We'll drop that into the
Hmm.
show notes too, if anyone wants to check it out. Maybe we'll come back and do a whole episode on that
Mhm.
one, because it's a whole world in and of itself on how to plan for that. But Garrett, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you for having me on. It was wonderful to join you both and talk a little bit about, kind of my passion in estate planning.
Yeah. And Kate, thanks for joining too and leading us through
yeah,
this.
thank you.
And everyone else, thanks for listening to this episode of the Planning Perspectives podcast. Make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast channel so you never miss an episode.
Thank you for listening to the Planning Perspectives podcast. Don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes are available. Visit our website at www.bmt.com or call us at 833-973-7633. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. Investments, not a deposit, not FDIC insured, not insured by any federal government agency, not guaranteed by the bank, may go down in value.